All right. And does that automatically let everybody in? Are we? All right. If you all are arriving for our webinar on how to use color in scientific figures, you're in the right place. We're just going to wait a minute or two so people can come on. Claire, maybe you can hop on and tell me or give me a thumbs up when it looks like, because I can't see the full, when I'm screen sharing, I can't see the full chat. But we're excited to have you all here. As you're filing in, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you're interested in the chat, we would absolutely love that. And we'll remind everybody again, but we are using Zoom. If you came for our last one, we were using a different platform. So this should be a little bit more familiar. If you have questions, you can enter them in the Q&A, which is separate from the chat. It'll be a little bit easier for us to see that you have a question. Okay, we'll just wait another minute.
We have a comment saying it looks like the chat is disabled. So let me make sure everyone can get in there.
Thank you for letting us know. We went through all the troubleshooting to make sure this would go very smoothly in the past couple days. And of course, there's always something that we have to figure out in real time.
Amanda went ahead and put a comment in the chat. Is everyone still struggling to comment in there?
Let's see. It sounds like the chat is visible but disabled. So I think, Claire, what do you think? I think that we can get started while we kind of figure that out. Does that sound good? So we can get the introductions out of the way?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, I'm getting in the zone. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I know that we have some new faces as well as people who joined us for our last webinar and also some wonderful people that we've worked with before. So thank you so much for yeah, devoting your time to coming to this. So we are going to today, we're going to talk about color. So we're going to give a quick introduction. And then we'll look at three things because, as you can imagine, color is a big topic. And so we're going to try to focus on three things today to give you applicable things that hopefully will help on your own work that you're doing to communicate science. We are going to talk about how to choose consistent color themes and why that can be helpful. How color can support accessibility and some quick tips on other things you can do for visual redundancy. And then also the part that I think is fun is how you can use color to emphasize what you think is important and what you want people to see. And a few more notes. So as we've been talking about, we'd love to hear from you throughout. Have we gotten the chat figured out? Are we golden? Are we still working on that? We're golden. Okay, excellent. So yeah, so please let us know who you are in the chat. And then if you have questions, there's a separate questions and answers section. And so that'll make it easier for our team to see what questions you have and bump them and answer them. All right. Let's see. So I know we've kind of repeated this a couple times, but we really would like to hear who you are. If you're a scientist, if you have your own lab that you're running, if you're a postdoc grad student that's tasked with making the figures for your lab, if you're a startup, if you are another science communicator, illustrator, I know we have many of you joining us today, or another glorious science advocate. So, a little bit about me for those of you who are new. So, I'm Nicole Fuller. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I started out at the Santa Cruz, now at Monterey Bay Science Illustration Program, and I've gotten to work at really incredible places like the Stanford Linear Accelerator, National Science Foundation. And then about 15 years ago, I founded SayoStudio so I could work with a broad group of scientists and science advocates. So we work with a lot of universities, research centers, companies that are science focused. Um, and today we have our team with us from SayoStudio. So you may have heard me mention Claire, and some of you may have worked with her as well. She's our art director. And we've got Angela on board, who's our business director, and Amanda and Anna, who helped put together this presentation for you today. And so they're all here to help answer questions and yeah, make sure things are going smoothly as we go along. If there's links and things like that that we can drop in the chat, they'll be trying to do that. Yeah, and so we have a team that works on a lot of our projects. We create illustrations, animations, design. We have a lot of wonderful freelancers and contractors who work with us as well to carry that out. So moving on with the introductions or beyond the introductions. So this is some of our work. So we do figures, which is what we're going to focus on today, specifically work that would be something that you'd see more in manuscripts, journal articles, all that good stuff. But a lot of what we do is also feature art, editorial art that's used on covers, in magazine features, website headers, that sort of thing. And one of the plugs that we're going to make before we go on is that if all of you are creating figures, diagrams, scientific visuals, great microscopy images, what have you. We're trying to just get people thinking about all the different ways that they can use images because a lot of times we see these images that are fantastic and they're published in one paper and not used again. So we're just trying to like remind people that visuals are powerful. As you know, like our world is kind of saturated with them and they're expected. And so the more that you can make use of them to really communicate the great work that you're doing, the better. So everything from social media to your websites to, you know, working with your communications, marketing officers, whether or not it's at a university office or your company to figure out how you can use those images in press releases, news articles, all that great stuff. It just will help advance understanding of science and what you do. All right. So we just wanted to put it out there. We're so glad you're here. We really appreciate your time. And I am kind of a I don't know. I truly believe that, you know, those of you who are working their butt off in science, like you're doing it because you're invested, you're passionate, and you love what you do, and it's going to make a difference, whether or not it's an incremental piece in a larger picture. It's important, and the more that we can help figure out how to get that information out there, the better it is for you and for larger society. So that's why we're here today. And then we just, one more little kind of intro thing is that science is complex. And I think a lot of times it can feel really overwhelming to figure out how to visualize it if you're trying to talk to a broader audience beyond your colleagues who intimately know your research, your area of expertise, because it is complex. And I think if we can come from it from a point of acknowledging that we don't need to simplify, we just want to clarify. And by that, I mean we can have levels of hierarchy in our visuals. That's things that, you know, we could keep talking about. We won't be the total focus of today, but the more that you can help direct people to look at the take-home point and then have secondary information for those of you, for those who want to go in more depth, the more you can have figures that work for a broader audience. All right, so let's get into color. So color basics. So we're going to talk about the stuff that you learned probably in preschool or kindergarten, but just so that we have a similar set of vocabulary as we're going on. So we're going to use these colors throughout. So hue is basically the color. Are we talking about red? Are we talking about green? Are we talking about blue? And saturation is the intensity of that color. So for something like pink, pink is a less saturated version of red, right? So it's got more white mixed in. And then on the other hand, the value lightness is how dark something is. So whether or not It's a dark black versus a light white, or a dark deep navy blue, or a bright sky blue. Those are examples of value and lightness that will give more concrete examples. And again, this is just an introduction, so we'll be talking about this throughout. And then some of the things that we'll be talking about are color families. So looking at our color wheel, we have the warm colors. So you've got oranges and reds. And then on the cool side, you've got blues and greens. And where those two meet, there's some overlap. And you can push those in different directions. For example, you can have more of a cool red, which basically means kind of on the pink side where it's edging a little bit more toward purple. It's just kind of fun to think about because sometimes we think red is red, but really there's a whole spectrum of red. Um, and then let's see, two more words. Complementary just means opposite. So let's see. So blue and orange are kind of fun complementary colors that you get used a lot. Green and red you've all seen in around the holidays time. And then analogous colors are ones that are next to each other. So they're not the same color, but blue and purple and green. And that kind of goes back to our cool colors. And then we have orange and red. So those are analogous colors. Those would be warm colors. But you can also cross over where you've got yellows, greens. Anyway, that is our introduction to color terms. And before we get into more details, we're going to talk a little bit about the red, green, blue standard in scientific figures. So a lot of times this is the fallback. If you have data in a graphing program, a lot of times it just automatically spits it out as red, green, blue. And so throughout this, we're just going to talk about like, are there other choices? Can you use other colors that either speak more directly to your data? Like, can you sync them with the microscopy images in the rest of your paper? Does that even make sense? Is that irrelevant? Just if we're thinking thoughtfully about how we can use color, it's always a good thing. And here, I just wanted to give examples of even within the red, green, blue standard color, there's a lot of ways we can push that. So this example are ones where I was kind of referring to before, where these are all more cool versions of their colors. So this red is actually more of like a pinky magenta. The green has a little bit more blue in it. This blue is actually a little bit more purpley, so you could argue that it's on the warm side. Anyway, so these are all variations on the red, green, blue. So even if you do need to stick to that standard set, you can shift them a little bit to make them your own. And then as this example, you see like it's not quite red, green, blue, but it still has that standard of contrast. So moving on. So there's lots of other options beyond red, green, blue. So we've got monochromatic colors, which is one color, but we're changing the shades, the values of how dark, how light, how saturated. We've got analogous, we've got complementary. And so these are all options that'll still make your data, your graphs, your figures easy to read without using lots of colors that gets distracting. Okay. And then this is kind of another subject that we have this content for, if it's helpful. Um, let's see. Sorry, I just got distracted for a moment. So this, let's go back to that slide, is more so about kind of the feeling of colors, how you can define them, and why you might even want to do that as a scientist. Still think it's kind of odd, but kind of fun to think about how brand, we're all about personal brand now, how that can apply to a scientist who's running their own lab. Like, what does that even mean? But really, it's about choosing colors that connect with you, with your lab, with your research. So I grabbed this confocal microscopy image from NIH. Let's see, courtesy of Tom Dirink, who I have not had the pleasure of working with, to just see how you can pull colors from, images that you're working with. And so if you wanted to look more at kind of that side, the emotional side of color, we have this resource for you to look at. So today, though, we are going to get into more about figures. So we're going to start with consistency, and then we're going to go to accessibility, and then we're going to go to emphasis. All right. And then as I'm going, just so everybody on my team knows, I can't see any chat or questions and answers. So please bump in if you need me to stop or pause. All right. So, consistency with color. It matters because it really improves readability. It helps reduce distractions so that your eye can really focus on what's important. And it helps your audience recognize patterns when you are, yeah, removing extraneous data because really color can be seen as another form of data. All right. So, this is very serious. I want you all to know that I in no way am against rainbows. I am a huge supporter of rainbows. But in scientific figures, if we're using a full rainbow, we better have a reason for it. If we're just scattershotting color all over the place, it can be really distracting. Of course, as we go throughout this webinar, I'm just going to put it out there. Rules are made to be broken. I love color. This is an illustration I did, so it's not a figure, but I just wanted to say that like I am the first to go against what I'm saying. So do it thoughtfully and think about why you're doing it. Okay, so getting back to figures, we're going to look at this very simple example of a bar graph and a pie chart as an example. So this is an example, and it's something that I think is common across a lot of scientific figures, where there's a lot of colors because people want to be able to say, okay, look at the green bar, look at that data, look at the yellow, wedge, and it's really that's the only reason for the colors, and it's not. It does, there's other ways to do it. So you can instead say column B and have a more cohesive color set that allows you to look at the data um, equally and not get distracted and try to impart meaning to the color that you didn't intend. And that's really what we're talking about throughout, is really thinking about intention and what you're trying to convey. And so this one is a great example where it's part in this fictional figure. We've got part A and we've got part B. And so my brain immediately wants to find patterns. So I'm looking at E and I'm looking at that green and I'm looking at this green over here and they're different. So I'm trying to figure out, are those supposed to match? Are they different? But if they're different, we need to make them a lot more different. So those are the sorts of things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about consistency. So this is an example where we've changed those colors just to one simple monochromatic color scheme. And this is where you can more easily just focus on the data and not get distracted by all the colors and trying to figure out what in the world that those colors are meant to represent. And sometimes you do want more color. You don't just want one color. And that's okay, but you can often choose colors from analogous colors. So here we've got almost fall colors. So we've got some oranges, yellows, and greens. That makes it feel a little more cohesive and allows the eye to settle and rest and really look at the information that's being imparted. Okay, so we're just going to run through a quick couple examples. So this is a figure that we did where we purposely went with a green color scheme because it was for technology that specifically is helping to increase the sustainability and reduce the environmental impact with some road construction things. Sorry, I'm not explaining that very well. But so that's why we went with the overall green tone. So there was some, yeah, that kind of goes back to the emotional component of how you might want to think about color in your figures. And then moving on to this is one where we're using different color blocks. And so this is how you can use color to group information. And so this was one for Erin Morris from the University of Michigan. Thank you for, yeah, working with us and letting us share this. So this is one where we didn't want one part to necessarily stand out. We wanted to really be able to share share each component of what's important about his research. Although you might notice that the kind of coral colors does stand out a bit more, and those were kind of the innovative parts of his research that he did want to stand out. And so again, we'll talk about emphasis a little bit more at the end. And then this is one more that I wanted to share, one that I did for Dr. Ridge. And this was one where I went back toward the rainbow because again, I love color, right? And so it's really helpful, even if you've been doing this a long time, to get a fresh eye and fresh perspective. In this case, it was the client. So they're like, this is too much. Like I don't, my eye doesn't know where to settle. And I'm like, but I've been looking at this for so long. And because I've been looking at it, I have this tunnel vision that I'm like, it makes sense to me. And so you need to ask people and get a fresh perspective of whether things are working, even when you've done this for a long time. And so this was the redo. As you can see, it's very similar, but we took out some of the yellows. I'll go back just so you can see. So we took out some of the oranges and the yellows, and really focus on just reds for the components that were the inflammatory. They're looking at lung damage in viral infections. And then the blue was meant to really just be the ones that had a downregulation of those inflammatory pathways. And so that's how we helped really stick with just two main color groups. All right, so in summary, you can use shades of a single hue for consistency. You can choose maybe a few shades, but for different groups to group information. It helps create a clean, unified look, helps group related data. And then you can always use lights, darks, hue changes within those colors to differentiate your different data points. All right, we're just going to pause for a moment if anybody has a question right now. And we will also have colors. Thinking about the rainbow again. We'll also have time for questions at the end. All right. Claire, if I don't see you pop up, I'm just going to keep talking.
So we did just get a question in from Simon Dedman. Hi, Simon. Um, Rainbow, other suggestions to cover a wide range of values with color.
Yeah, so that is a really good question. And I was actually looking back at the figure that we did with Simon for his shark ecology, and we did use a lot of rainbows. And sometimes it's unavoidable. I would say that if possible, and it's something that we'll look at as we go on, um, if it feels necessary to have a lot of colors, give other cues for context. So whether or not that's other pictures within, and I'm sorry I don't have that figure in this presentation so I can show you all. But so you can have other pictures to tell a total story. So the colors kind of are a supporting component and not the only thing. I know that there's a lot of figures though where you do need, it's just data heavy. Like it's just a lot of dots. It's a lot of arrows with it. And so I would say, if possible, rely on icons. And then as we were looking at, like there's a lot that you can do just within, say, three color, if you choose three main colors and then vary the saturation and darkness within that, there's a lot that you can do with that. I hope that helps. And I guess the last thing is, again, like the next section in just a moment, we're going to be talking a little bit more about accessibility, but you always want to work towards accessibility. It really does help all viewers, whether or not there's differences in, what you can see, whatnot. But to some degree, like you might have to just make decisions. And as long as you're doing that thoughtfully and thinking about your end audience, um, you'll be in a much better place. So hopefully that helps.
One more question
Mhm.
that was in the comments here. Uh, Benazar from, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, from Germany says, do you think about RGB and CMYK at this moment?
Yes. So I was not even going to touch on RGB, CMYK, HSB, color, but I will talk about that briefly right now since you asked. I've tried to always keep things in RGB. It used to be that when you're publishing things that the end user wanted things in CMYK. So RGB is basically using the light spectrum. And and this, yeah, I'm seeing how this can be a huge tangent. But and so it's a wider spectrum. You can get more colors out of that than if you're sticking with CMYK. So CMYK is the ink spectrum, basically. So it's what printers will use. And so it's a little bit more limited. Some things fade out a little bit, like blues. So anyway, point is, we try to always create things in RGB because it's a wider color spectrum and then convert, if needed, to CMYK. It's much easier to go that way. And most places anymore actually want RGB so they can convert it on their end. It's one of those things like if you're working with a journal, you'd want to check with them. But a lot of times, because they're publishing first online, they want the RGB version and then they can do the conversion with their color profiles on their end. So, and then one more thing on that. So if you're like, say, in Photoshop, you can look at, there's different options to look at the color spectrum. One thing that I like to do is use HSB, which is hue, saturation, is it brightness or blackness? I should know that. Anyway, it's a lot easier because it's just like a standard like color spectrum and then adding white, black, and then the saturation. I find that much easier to work with than trying to change colors with RGB. So I hope that helps. Okay. So moving into, those were all great questions. Thank you. Moving into accessibility in science communication. So as we've been talking about, we want to help as many people as possible be able to interpret our visuals and really clearly see the data, reduce barriers and confusion, and reinforce key points with visual redundancy. And so to start with, we're going to look at this on a white background. So accessibility can be as simple as just really making sure the contrast is strong, making sure that things like fonts are big enough for reading. And again, that's going to be different depending on your audience. You know, journals have a very set, you know, a nature journal, family of journals. Let me think, you know, the AB is, you know, 8 points, the labels are 7 points. You know, they have very specific things. But if you're designing for other things, you know, like your social media posts, your websites, you know, other things, as much as you can think through, like, can I make this font a little bit bigger? Do I have an older audience? And maybe that's not as important. Maybe like you're sharing this with mostly 20-year-olds. But the more that you can think about the wide audience that's going to be looking at your material, the more it'll be easy for everybody to see. Okay. So one of the ways that you can do that is just checking on your contrast. So this is one of our monochromatic color schemes that we were talking about. And so the one area that I would be worried about is kind of like this light green. And then are these really contrasting enough? And so one of the things that we did was, okay, would it look better with some more color? I know we've been talking a lot about how you can stay in one color, but for this example, we were looking at would it look better with different color? And then we were looking at it in grayscale so that we can really determine, like, is that contrast enough? And so by my eye, and again, this is something that would be helpful to get other outside people to look at. This bottom one with the yellow, to me, that doesn't look like a strong enough contrast. And there's actually accessibility checkers out there. I don't think we have a good link for this, but we could look for one after the fact that can help you decide like what that cutoff really is. And then this is another example. This data plot is actually working pretty well when you put it in grayscale. But this is a great point to talk about, again, redundancy. If there is one end of this that you really wanted to emphasize, you could think about putting a pattern in the areas that you want to differentiate, like, you know, hash patterns, cross patterns, all that wavy patterns, all that good stuff. Of course, when you're doing that, then you have to decide, is it too busy and distracting? It's kind of like patterns, is it being helpful or is it being distracting? The same with colors. If we're using 50 different colors, is there a reason for it? Is it helpful or is it being distracting? And then I just wanted to go back because I forgot to mention another thing when we're talking about visual redundancy is the biggest, easiest thing in this plot, and I'm going to go all the way back to here where it's bigger so it's easier to see, is we can use icons, you know, just simple diamonds for one, keep circles for another, squares for another, and crosses for another, so that it's easy to really easily differentiate all of these. All right, so moving along. So we're going to talk a little bit about color blindness. And again, this is a very deep topic, so we're just going to kind of scratch the surface. But I think, as most of you probably know, the most common form of color blindness, red-green, it means that a lot of the colors that you think are easy to tell the difference of if you can see the full structure, the whole spectrum tend to fade out. So it's something to be aware of when you're designing things. And one thing that I wanted to point out is that because it's called red-green color blindness, so that you can't see reds, you're missing. Now I'm forgetting which one is cones and which one is rods. But anyway, is that you cannot use reds and greens in your diagrams. And often that's not the case. So I just wanted to revisit these color palettes that we were first looking at, where we were playing with like, okay, these are still reds and greens, but I've shifted them a little bit. And so how do these hold up when we're looking at them with a red-green colorblind filter? So as you can see, kind of what I'm thinking of as the standard red, green, blue, the full saturation is you can actually differentiate those colors. You can from between this red and this green. It's not fantastic, but there is a difference. For protanopia, it's even clearer, that difference. And then if you look at this one where we've made a bit more, where we've shifted all of those a little bit, you can even more clearly see the difference between these colors. And so then where we run into color is this is definitely, to somebody who sees the full spectrum, this is red and this is green. And now you see we've totally lost the difference between the two. So that's where you have to be careful. And especially if it's something where it's really important that you are able to differentiate those colors, that you check this. And so this is something that you can check. And then actually, sorry, before I say that, and then you can see that these colors, they really stand out as well, even though they're shifted. And this is something, if you are using the Adobe products, there are resources out there. We have some of these links, and there's a lot of other image testers on the website that you can see. If specifically, or if you, I'm getting tired of talking, my mouth is blah. If you're in Photoshop and you go to View and Proof Setup, you can change it to look at the protanopia and the, okay, I have to remember to say it, deuteranopia colorblind filters to see, and that's how we looked at these. Okay, so looking a little bit further into this, this is another example of, like a nice color spectrum. We've kind of got the rainbow, but the C and the D really fade together. So instead, if we shift this to our monochromatic colors of blues, then we can see that surprisingly we get a lot more contrast in those colors under the red-green colorblind filter. So those are just things that you can think about. I think that we always assume that these colors are less less easier to see, harder to see. But as you can see here, they're actually easier to differentiate. All right. And this is another one, breaking the rules. So this is an illustration I did a long time ago. It's very chaotic. It's meant to be very chaotic. It's meant to show how full and complex the extracellular matrix inside the brain is. So it was looking at delivery of drugs by nanospheres. And the people that we were working with, they were very adamant that we use green and red because they wanted to have it tracked to their microscopy images. So that might not have been the choice I would have made if I'd had the chance. But this was an example I wanted to show you that, yes, sometimes greens and reds can work together. And a lot of the reason for that is because there's a larger context to the overall story. And so this is it with the colorblind filter. And you can see that some of it does kind of fade out. So some of like our main particle here, it does kind of fade out a little bit, but you can still follow the story. So it's not quite as much of an impact, but the information is still there. All right. So again, just to review some of our accessibility checkpoints. As much as possible, if you can use strong contrast, lights and darks, not just different colors. You ideally want to you ideally want to try to avoid using two highly saturated colors with similar brightnesses, like super bright red and bright green. You can choose one bold color to highlight key data points. And then you can use a lot of different tools out there to check for colorblind and other accessibility issues. So I know that's a lot. I don't know if there's any questions for this um, section.
No questions specifically for accessibility, not yet, at least.
Okay.
But Simon did share a resource he uses called Color Brewer for
Ooh, thank
accessibility.
you. Excellent. I appreciate that.
And then if
Okay.
no questions come in, maybe we can address it at the end. Simon did have one more question in regards to like color choice and busyness, but we can address that at the end, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good if you can remind me.
Okay.
Um, awesome. Okay, emphasis. How do you emphasize what's important with color? So this part is kind of the fun part. So again, this all goes back to contrast, choosing strong contrast, dark and light, complementary colors where you have colors across from each other on the color wheel, then also gradations of colors for sequences where you're varying the differences of saturation and lightness. As you can see, this is all building on each other. Much of it's related. So we're going to give you some more examples. This is a really quick one going back to this graph that you're probably all getting sick of. Um, we're using the monochromatic, all blue colors, but what we're doing to bring attention to one spot is that we're removing color. So I wanted to point out that sometimes it's really our eye is just drawn to what's different. So in this case, what's different is the lack of color. And so I wanted to look at what that would be like on a white background as well. So we've got the version on the top with a white and the version on the bottom with a dark gray. Your eye is drawn to what's different. All right. And then if you wanted to pop it even more, you can use, this is where you bring in a color that is complementary. This coral color, it's not quite complementary. It's more of saturated opposite color. But this is one where oftentimes people would use a bright red, which is definitely an option, but there's always other options beyond that. Oranges, magentas, a lot of times warm colors do draw our attention more. It's a good trick to rely on kind of the cooler colors and then use the warmer colors to pop. Um, and then this is one where we just wanted to, again, emphasize, that's funny, emphasize what to emphasize. So the point being that when you choose colors, you might not even initially realize that you're unintentionally emphasizing things. And so this color gradation, in many ways, as far as color goes, it makes sense. We've got these analogous colors. They're going from cool colors to the bright yellow. But as you can see, they look like we're almost purposely highlighting certain states. And then if we swap these colors, now it looks like to me that we're highlighting completely different states. So you just want to think through like, is that in fact what I want people to take away from this data? All right. And on the same token, you can choose what not to emphasize. So in this diagram, we wanted it to be really simple and very iconic, symbolic, very flat. And so up here, we've got oxygen molecules. So usually when you're showing oxygen, you use red because that's the atomic color that we've all kind of decided in the scientific world that's what oxygen is represented by. And so in this case, we did not want that to be the attention because red is such a attention grabber. And that goes back to, I'm sure you can all think about the relationships, the reasons why we might think red, why that catches our attention as humans. So anyway, so we purposely chose to put those back in gray so they wouldn't stand out. And then this, if you were all at the previous webinar, this is the figure we worked through different things on spacing and alignment. Today, we're just going to use it to quickly look at color. So this is another example where there's a lot of color, and it's not necessarily used purposefully. And so we're just going to look at how we revamped it to that color scheme that we've been talking about, where it's cool colors for the things that we need to impart the information of, but aren't the main focus. And then used a bright red to really focus the eye on the data points that we think are important. All right, moving along. So we've gotten through this pretty quickly. Okay, this is good. So we want to use color for emphasis. And so we have all these bullet points, right? But as you've heard me say over and over and over again, really, it's almost more about before you even apply color, it's thinking about what you want to stand out. And from that, then you can think about the colors and why you're using them and how you're using them. All right. So this is a point for questions. So at this point, we actually, Dr. Dedman, we do have a few of his figures to talk through things that we would think about when we were looking to help edit them. So we have those to go through, and then we'll have the end section for questions. But at this point, if there's any questions specifically about emphasis, please let us know. And I'll just pause for a minute.
So none quite yet. We'll wait a little bit longer.
Okay.
But Simon has a couple and more that we can address at the end, one on accessibility and one on the color choice.
Okay, excellent. So I am going to go, oh, what, Claire?
Oh, Amanda asked a question to everyone. I have a figure with 7 different experimental groups. How do I show what without using a rainbow of colors? What's the best way to differentiate multiple groups while keeping things clean and accessible? This might be kind of a question for the chat. So if you guys want to kind of tune in there and give your thoughts based off of what Nicole has shared, that'd be great.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah. Okay. I am going to go to our last little section. And then we can chime in more about that question and look at people's answers and address any other last questions. So Dr. Dedman, he is looking at shark interactions, marine ecologist. And so Simon, just so you know, we did not fully revamp your figures, but we're going to walk through some of the questions that we would ask you to kind of clarify where we want to focus and how best to do that. And I also want to take this time to say we really appreciate all of the submissions. Thank you so much for sending those in. We had a lot to choose from, so we chose to look at this kind of package of figures to briefly go through for this. So thank you, everybody. And so with no further ado, let's just look through these a little bit. So this figure, like really a lot of these that Dr. Dedman provided are very clean. So we just did a really simple change where we just filled in this bar. And that's because when you have really thin lines outlining things, a lot of times your eye, it takes a minute to take that as one cohesive piece. If you fill in the bar with color, it's much easier to quickly grasp that as one piece. And the thin lines, they tend to cause what I call buzz. Like your eyes are just kind of like having a hard time figuring out where to focus. And so the things that I would ask are what the diamonds represent the little symbols within the graph here, the bars, and if those should be different between the two. And then another thing I would ask, there's this line that goes across the bottom here, and I should point out that we got these figures without the broader manuscript to look at and the figure legends, so we don't have a lot of information about what's there. And so this bottom section, I'm not sure what that is showing, pointed out with this line here. So should one section be treated differently? Should it be a different color, or maybe just have a different pattern in it to show that it's related but slightly different? If it's, and then let's see, a few other questions. I'm guessing these are error bars up here. A lot of times I'd recommend kind of the standard T on either end to make it easier to track where that line ends. So those are some of the questions. We did check for with a colorblind filter, and it actually reads pretty well. But again, just for overall accessibility, it's easier to see with them filled in. And then this is another graph. This is a lovely, straightforward graph for us to look at. And we really liked it. So the simple cleanups that we had weren't all about color. They're more about the font, making this smaller and not bold because it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to stand out. So there's no reason to have them bold. Making the little data point symbols bigger so that you can see them. And I'd argue we can make them even bigger than this. And then one trick that is often helpful for graphs is rather than having the grid lines in the background, making them as alternating solid colors. Again, that goes back to having thin lines. A lot of times our brain has a hard time figuring out just following it. It just feels like more information rather than being background information. Let's see. And I guess the other thing, we just played with color just to have fun with it. And so as far as accessibility, it's not necessary, but it's again something you can think about. Are there different colors that we want for apex? Maybe the original that he had for the apex, the top of it being red, maybe that makes sense. But we'd want to work through that and ask questions. And then the last one. So this is a really has a lot of different data points. And so we have not done anything. This is the original, and we would love to ask questions as far as are two colors sufficient? It looks like it is because they're representing this top down and bottom down, but we'd want to check to see, or maybe there's some other way to like to make a background section for these different sections for the atolls versus the high islands. To me, some of the differences between the bold, which I think is moderate, is harder to differentiate. So are there other ways that we could, again, this goes back to visual redundancy, clarify some of those things? Maybe some of these could be dotted lines, maybe not. Would it be helpful to add symbols for the different kinds of sharks, for the planktivores versus the herbivores? Let's see, what are some of the other color questions we would ask? Yeah, I think those is a good summary of the questions we would ask, and then we can think, and then that'll help lead us to thinking through, are there other ways to use color? Is there other ways to kind of differentiate the the sections? So we have this summary section, and I think you've heard me say this a lot. So really what it comes down to is, are my colors purposeful? And so ways that you can start thinking about that are, have you chosen a color palette? Is it something that you're trying to use throughout all of your papers, all of your communications, whether or not it's on social media and websites? Is that important to you? Do your colors feel cohesive? And are you really emphasizing the things that you want to emphasize? Yeah. And so with that, this is our future webinar spot, and now is a good time to stop and address any more questions. um, and hear from all of you.
Yeah, so for emphasis, Julia made a great point in the comments, so I'll just read that
Okay.
for you. She said, if you're thinking about using color, I'd consider whether it's helpful for either highlighting a group or groups of interest or showing relationships between groups. For
Yes,
example, do you have multiple groups with one treatment or key variable context? If there are informative clusters, each cluster might have a specific color with different gradations, and the control is gray.
that's wonderful.
Hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, and I should point out as we've gone through a lot of this, there's fantastic resources out there. So one of the things that we're working to do is kind of collate those and put them together in one place that's easy to find. And that's the sort of thing it does take time on our part to put all of that together. So if it's something that does sound like it would be helpful, we'd love to hear from you all. And if it's something like, I can find that information on my own, then that's great for us to know too.
And so a couple more questions that I think is a good time to go through them now.
Hmm.
Um, we'll go in chronological order. So Simon, in the color choice, on color choice said, is there a case to be made that sometimes it's okay if a graphic is busy if it's the main graphic and you hope people will spend a lot of time on it uh, because it'll mean they spend less time understanding the whole paper?
Yes. How do you like that short answer? No, I agree. And th this is a place where I think, again, it can be really busy. There can be a lot of information, but you can still emphasize certain areas to start with and kind of guide the eye through. And there's different ways to do that, between all the way from text, what's bold, what's smaller, to colors, arrows, flow. There's a lot of things that you can do. And even when it is busy, and this is where I'm a bit biased as an illustrator who likes drawing. Let's be honest. I like trying to make things pretty. Um, I think there's value in that approach because even if it's busy, people want to look at it. And so when you're trying to make something pretty, you think about composition and where does the eye settle and where does it go, which can be applied to just data-rich figures. But I also think that if we can add some context, like the beauty of sharks, the beauty of the ecological system, it helps people kind of like want to look and invest deeper, yeah, time into that.
I love that answer. Okay, another from Simon on accessibility.
Hmm.
He says trade-off of accessibility um, against or versus pop. So start to default to doing everything in Civitas 2 palette, most accessible, but it makes everything look boring. So do you eschew accessibility for some to make it better for most?
Yes.
Mhm.
So as if you look through our portfolio of work, you'll definitely see that we make trade-offs. So we try to keep this in mind. We try to be mindful, but we don't always 100% succeed with the accessibility. So where we're coming from is we're trying to be mindful of that. Um, it's because I do think it's worth that pop. I do think it's worth yeah, making it interesting and beautiful within the larger spectrum. However, again, I think there's a lot of things that we can do with kind of the redundancy cues to still um, make it interesting to somebody who has the limited color palette. I hope that helps.
Okay, another question from Joanna from Portugal, if I'm remembering correctly. In a black and white figure and all the grays, how do you create emphasis on a focal point?
In a black and white figure. Okay, so if you're going for totally black and white, and I'm not allowed to use any other color. Okay, so I would say if you are really going for pop in total black and white, I would keep most things in kind of the middle gray tones, and then have a few things that are really like completely black. That would be my answer. And then the other thing that Claire and I were talking about having a different webinar on is kind of when to use the special effects, and how to do that well so it doesn't look dorky. So what I mean by that are that, like you can do things like glows. So say you want one thing to really stand out in this sea of gray. You've got a sea of gray and you've got one black thing. That'll stand out. But now you have a sea of gray and you've got five black things that you kind of want to stand out, but then you want one to really stand out. And then you can do kind of like a white glow behind it. So it's really offset. So I think tricks like that, or on the other side, like drop shadows. The problem is that those things can be really overused and make you look like your artwork is from 20 years ago. So yeah.
That was a wonderful answer. Um, okay, and from anonymous, any tips for using color to simplify complexity without losing important information, especially with multi-dimensional data sets?
That is a really good question. And I think to some degree, I would just have to look at the data to see. Um, I know that's not a very helpful answer. Um, but yeah, a lot of it goes back to, using gradations of value, so that some of the information is still there and still visible. But now it looks like we just have 3 minutes left. So is there one last, or shall we wrap?
I think that's everything. I think we can wrap
Okay.
up.
Okay. All right. Those were such great questions. I'm so excited. I really appreciate everybody's participation and time. So we would love to hear if all of you are interested in future webinars and kind of what content would be helpful. So these are some of the ideas that we've thrown out there. We'd love to hear in the chat. And I think Claire also, I don't know if we have time for a poll or not. But anyway, let us know. You can let us know by email, on social media as well. So after this, we'll follow up with an email with a recorded webinar. And in about a week or so, kind of depending on our workload, we'll send out a PDF with some of these tips and a blog. We would love for you all to sign up for our newsletter, reach out. If you have questions, we offer a free 15-minute consults. And then if you need more time to work through things, we can talk about those consultation options. Yeah, and we do have free resources about different aspects of communicating science and visualizing science at this spot. And let's see, we just have a few more. A shameless plug. We have our YouTube channel where we've gotten to talk about, Claire and I talk about science communication and how that's changing with a lot of the new tools out there. And then also gotten to talk with a lot of you all researchers about what you do and what is so exciting about your science. So definitely check that out. And again, we're always looking for input on what you want to hear more of. So if you do see that and you're like, I would love to hear more of this, please let us know. And that leads us to the end. So thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back for our next one. Right now, we're kind of going on like a 2-month schedule, but again, a lot of that is driven by the interest from you all. So thank you so much for joining us today. Take care. Let's see.